the wonderful end of history, the end of the Cold War. Fukuyama's statement comes out. The unipolar moment has begun. The United States has won. Democracy has won. Communism has been killed. Yeah, the good guys won. And then something happened, though, where NATO, which was set up to fight the Soviet Union, had to come up with a new justification for its existence. And a lot of people, by the way, Donald Trump himself pointed out several times, why does NATO still exist if the Soviet Union doesn't anymore? Their enemy went away. Well, it seems that in the 1990s and throughout that end of history moment, the seeds of the new conflicts that we see now were planted and have now borne fruit.
Yeah, that's right. And I think if you go back to, and not, this is not the conspiracy version, this is the straight version. When H.W. Bush announced the New World Order, he wasn't really talking about one world government conspiracy stuff. He was saying America rules the world now. The USA is the world government. And as we saw, as the doctrine was implemented, especially by his successors, Bill Clinton and his son, and then Barack Obama as well, what that means is that the actual world law, not that I'm the greatest fan of this, but this is the treaty that everyone signed, the UN Charter, that actually is obsolete now. Now, instead, we have the American-led order, where, as Bush Sr. said, what we say goes. And so that means they can start wars without a UN Security Council vote or even a declaration of war from Congress or any other real authority. And essentially, it's all built on this self-righteous justification that if we weren't holding the world down, then it would burst into flames. It would all go to hell, and it would either be us or the Russians or the Chinese or some other horrible power would take over the world. So we have to take it over, but not call it that. We just have to be the hegemons of the world to prevent badness from breaking out. That's essentially the justification. And so from the beginning, in spite of their solemn vows and promises and agreements with the Soviets and then later the Russians, they expanded their influence, not just into the Middle East, we all know that story, but they expanded the NATO military alliance into Eastern Europe and right up to Russia's borders, including the Baltic states. They did the color-coded revolutions. Well, first the Balkan Wars, and then the color-coded revolutions. Oh, did I skip Bill Clinton when I talked about lawless wars? Clinton did Kosovo, then Bush did Iraq, then Obama did Libya. No, I did say Clinton. So anyway, the color-coded revolutions against friends of Russia in their near abroad, including Ukraine twice in 10 years, Bush Jr. in 2004 and Obama again in 2014, put their thumb, America's thumb on the scale in the uprisings there and the protest movements there to facilitate.
So what you're talking about are a series of color revolutions, and we've covered color revolutions here on the program a number of times, but essentially what these are they take these, it might start out as a legitimate but small movement somewhere in one of these other countries. In some cases it may not exist. The Arab Spring, by the way, I just mentioned, of course, is an example of this. In some cases, the organization itself might have always been started by USAID or some CIA front group or U.S. front group overseas, and they are able to turn this into a national protest to try essentially to get the government to fall. And what they're doing really is, I've always read the color revolutions as an attempt to recreate the end of the Soviet Union over and over and over again, to say, okay, well, we don't like this government and this worked this one time, so we're just going to try it over and over and over.
Mm-hmm. And it does seem to work. The template usually is they dispute an election and they go, well, we have exit polls and our exit polls say that our guy won, not yours. This kind of thing. Refuse to accept defeat. And then, so oftentimes you're talking about a very poor country like Ukraine or Georgia, and then these NGOs come in with tens of millions of dollars to support.
By the way, this just happened in Romania. This just happened in Romania like last week.
In Georgia
where
right now.
It's happening in Georgia as well right now, where
Georgia.
they were defeated. The Soros candidate was defeated. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, we don't like that election. We don't like those results. So, we're going to cancel the next election. And then in Romania, the one that drove me wild was they said, we don't like the results. And Russia got interfered. Well, how do you know? And he said, oh, we think there were some TikTok videos. They promoted some TikTok videos of the candidate, and therefore Russia interfered. So they actually canceled the election, and I believe they're going to rerun the first iteration again of the presidential election in a NATO EU country.
Right. And again, as everyone is familiar, all of this is in the name of democracy. But see, this
Yes.
goes to the heart of it, right? Like, forget the most cynical arms dealers and the most cynical liars and whatever in the thing. If you take even the most sort of public spirited take on this thing, that no, really, we're just trying to spread, as George Soros calls them, open societies in the world. We are talking about a lot of backwards, corrupt dictatorships or sort of pseudo fake democracies and this kind of thing. And so you might really wish that they had regular elections and an independent judiciary and open public corruption bureau and everything is just great over there. But imagine, Jack, really, the U.S. empire going to such lengths to create such democratic systems in other people's countries. But then, oh, they don't care who wins the election, though. They're perfectly happy to see the other side win and the American guy lose or the pro-Western guy lose. Yeah, right. There's has to be built in, no matter what, a conflict of interest in all of this stuff. There's no way that it can be just so selfless that all they really want is the people of the world to be free, unless being free means, just like democracy means, when the Democrats win and get what they want. Otherwise, they'll frame you for treason, whether it's Trump or whether it's what's his name in Romania, and they'll depose you and cheat and do what they have to do to maintain their power. And so that's the key. It's just like a cop who can get away with running a red light or even killing a hooker or something. And like the law doesn't apply to the law enforcer a lot of the times. And in that case, it's us. It's the middle part of North America.
Or if you're the nephew of a wealthy and well-connected legal family in Pennsylvania, and your girlfriend mysteriously stabs herself 20 times, including 10 times in the back, and it just so happens that Josh Shapiro, the attorney general, is a family friend, that suddenly it gets ruled a suicide. I bring that up as a hypothetical. That's not a reference to anything that I've been covering here on the show.
I actually only just read that story for the first time the other day, and they were talking about it like everybody knows this story, and I was like, "What? I had totally missed this." I've been working on a book for a year or two.
I've been going down the road on that one quite extensively. I'll have to show you. I'll have to send you the podcast we did on it. But again, it is the powerful. Ellen Greenberger's a name, by the way, for folks who want to look this up. For folks in power, they stay in power and they attempt to expand their power. It is something that is historic. We've seen power act this way across centuries. Mearsheimer talks about this, by the way, as an understanding of this is how great powers operate. But it seems as though, and I like the way Mearsheimer frames it, because he says the United States is attempting to achieve something beyond great power status in the fact where they want to be this sort of global hegemon. And this is why, by the way, you can go to Washington, D.C., and you'll see furious op-eds from members of both the Republican and Democrat parties arguing that everyone needs to focus on some conflict or some border that is thousands of miles away, and don't worry about the public crime issues in your hometown or the fentanyl zombies meandering around. No, this thing that's happening in some desert or some desolate Eurasian, winterized tundra is something that you should be totally focused on. And by the way, I still do this. I still go to newsstands. I know nobody does it anymore, but I go to newsstands and I try almost every morning to look at the cover of the Washington Post and the New York Times. I got to tell, and the Wall Street Journal, Ukraine is on the cover almost every single day. Every once in a while they change it out with Syria, but then they go right back to Ukraine. It's like, is this really the most important thing? That you wonder why nobody reads it anymore, but it's something that is really being tried so hard to be jammed down the throats of the American people. And look, I call it the regime. Other people call it the uniparty. Mike Benz calls it the blob. Whatever name people want to use for it, I think that we've all realized that, and the 2024 election was a huge part of this, that something has gone wrong and a disconnect took place between the people of this country and the people who are running it, because their interests and the interests of the people who live here are simply in no way connected.
Yeah. And, the real problem is, that these guys are sure what heroes they are. I mean, there's a great quote. I'm sure you're familiar with this, where someone had confronted John Laughlin, who had been the acting director of the CIA, but was a longtime CIA guy, senior official. And someone said, Donald Trump says you're all the deep state or something like that was the question. And he says, well, thank God for the deep state. Because let me tell you something. This is at the height of Russiagate hoaxery.
I remember this. I remember.
He says, let me tell you something. The problem is not at Fort Meade or at the Hoover Building or in Langley. The problem is at 1600 Pennsylvania. Now, if Donald Trump was really a traitor and a suborned, blackmailed slave of Vladimir Putin, then I guess maybe. But you notice that the CIA and the NSA, they're completely post-constitutional national security state structures. The FBI as a bureau of the Department of Justice might be constitutional in a sense, but they're way outside of their writ when, as we all know now, and a lot of us knew then, but we all know now, it was the FBI that was framing him for this treason in the first place. I mean, the CIA started it and the FBI really continued the whole thing of framing up the president on this ridiculous hoax.